It's David. So if you're like me, you've recently started using Xamarin Studio and you've realized that there aren't a whole lot of great resources out there. So I'm going to start creating a few videos that sort of help get down the basics of Xamarin to someone who's new to Xamarin but not necessarily new to programming. So today I want to talk about setting up a table view using an XIB file or Xcode interface builder. Something that should be straightforward, but surprisingly is difficult to find a lot of information on. So right here, I just have a navigation controller and a basic view. I just created a single view app, added in a navigation controller, and then control drag and set the relationship as a root. So now when I load it, I have a nice view controller there ready to go. Another thing to note right off the bat with Xamarin is that using storyboards isn't really the greatest idea. At first it may seem like an easier approach, but creating everything programmatically in the long run tends to be a lot easier to manage and a lot easier to reuse your code across multiple views. Whereas when you use a storyboard, you end up creating a lot of unique views where you could technically reuse a lot of code, but by virtue of using a storyboard, it sort of complicates things. Anyways, to dive into getting this going, what we're going to do first is go ahead and create a cell. So the nice thing about Xamarin is you can go ahead and design a cell in an XIB file. So we'll go to iOS and we will go to TableView cell. So we'll call this game cell. I've already went ahead and created a games class that we'll use to load data into our cells. So that way we can create a dynamic table view that takes a list of games objects and populates a table full of our game cells. So we'll go ahead and hit new. So here you can see that it's given us our game cell CS file and our XIB or Xcode interface builder file. So we have both of these and both are very important. So for the sake of doing this video, I'm not really going to dive deep into how to do the dynamic views or how to size these dynamically. I'll go into that a little bit later. So right now I'm just going to do it for an iPad Pro that's a 9.7 inch screen. So that should be good enough. We'll go ahead and make sure that the width is 80. Okay, perfect. So basically here, you'll notice off to the side in our properties pane, this is where we're going to want to start. This is just some basic setup info, so that way we can use it later on in our code. So the reuse identifier is what we're going to use to identify this XIB file and identify that this cell is reusable and meant to be populated with unique data and created several times and have several instances of it created throughout our code. So what I like to do is go ahead and name it the same thing as my controller because it's a lot easier to keep track of and I don't have to think of multiple names. The other reason why it's really nice is if you look over here in our game cell file, it goes ahead and creates a key for us as an NS string called game cell. So if we go ahead and name the reuse identifier the same thing, we can just access that key whenever we need to use the name for either one, and it simplifies life a lot. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead, and black is not the greatest background color, especially when the default text color is black, so we're going to go ahead and set that to white. Move this over a little bit. So here we're just going to go ahead and add in two labels. Really simple. So we'll go ahead, add in a label right there. And again, I'm not going to go into any of that really dynamic parts of layouts or dynamic resizing. This is just to help you get up and going, creating a quick table view. So we've got our two labels, perfect. We'll make them a little bit longer so that way all our text will fit in there. And then from here, we want to go ahead and give each one of these a name, so that way we can call it from our code. So we'll call this title text, and we don't really need to worry about what's in it right now because it'll just get replaced the second we call it. And then here, oh, oops, for some reason. Okay, there we go. Sometimes it takes it a second to switch from the past, or from whatever you had selected previously, especially when you update information like names. And then here, we'll call this the price text. So really simple. We're just gonna display a game name and however much it costs. You can go ahead. The process for adding in image views and things like that is very similar, but we're not really going to worry about that right now. And then we're going to go ahead and make the price color a light gray. So from here, I'll show you my game cell, or my games class. It's a really simple class, just a basic constructor that sets the name and the price, and two data members, name and price. Name's a string, price is a double. I'll try to include as much code as I can down in the comments, but for now, you can just pause the video and copy it if you have to. So we'll go ahead and save that. The next thing we're going to want to do is come in here and create, essentially, this file is associated with our XIB file. So what we want to do is create a function in here. First of all, we're going to want to create an empty constructor, so that way we can create a cell really quickly without having to pass any information to it. So there we go. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is create a function that will populate the cell with all the information we want. And we'll call this from our TableView controller every time we create a cell. But this is a pretty common practice. You'll see it named update cell or bind data. I'll just go ahead and call it populate cell. And so what we'll do is we'll have this take in a game object, or a games object that I've created, and we'll just call it game obj. And then what we'll do, so behind the scenes here, kind of what's happening is there's also a designer file with the game cell file. And you'll see here the two labels that we created are now in here with the names we gave them. So once we name them, it adds them to this designer file, which then allows us to access them from our C# file, or our cell controller file. So here, really simple. We're just going to access the name text label, or sorry, what did we name that? Let's go back to our designer file. Oh, there we go. We called it title. Okay. So title text dot text to access the text attribute, and then equals, and then we'll just pull the game. We'll pull the name from the game object title, and that's good to go. And then from here, we'll go ahead and set the price text attribute, and we will pull that from our game object as well. And we will pull the price. Perfect. All right, so when we call this function, whatever game object we pass into it, oh, whoops, we gotta turn that into a string if we want that to work out, because obviously it can't handle a double. So basically, we just pass a game object to the cell, and then to the populate cell function, and it'll go ahead and add in our data. And so it's really good to have this function, because every time you reload data or things like this, this makes it really easy. You just have to call this function, and it goes ahead and reloads all this data after you've updated the cell. All right, so we're going to go ahead and save that. Now it's on to the fun part, actually creating the TableView controller. So what we're going to do is a lot like we did before. We're going to go ahead and add new file, go over to iOS, but this time we're going to start out with the view controller, and we'll just call it, we'll call it my table controller. Okay, here we go. Create a new one. You'll notice here it creates an XIB file. We don't actually need that, since we're just going to be loading in cells, and it'll automatically fit to whatever view we're going into. So we can go ahead and remove that. oh, remove, delete, and then come into this file, which we're in right now, and instead of having it be a UI view controller, we're going to have it inherit from UI table view controller. And we'll come down here, UI table view controller, and then we're going to have to modify the constructor a little bit. So that way it can actually be the constructor for something that's inheriting from a UI table view controller. And then here we'll just put handle. Perfect. And we're going to want to create a constructor here as well that's empty, just so that way we can create it really fast and not have to worry about passing in all sorts of weird stuff. Boom. Perfect. Awesome. So another thing that I'm going to do here, what you'll see a lot of people out there who will create a table source class as well, which is really good for organizing the data if you're dealing with a large or complicated table source. But from what I've seen, it's not really necessary. I like to do the table source and the table view controller all in the same table controller class. For me, it just makes it a lot easier, and you're not calling functions between the two. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create a list, an empty list of game objects. And to do that, we're going to have to use the generic collections. Library. Perfect. All right, we've got that. And then the other thing we're going to want to use for this is the link class, because that'll give us a lot of fun operations we can use on lists. If you're ever using a table view controller, I highly recommend that you store all your data as lists. It makes it really easy to organize, search, and manipulate the data. And it's just really efficient and really fast with the built-in libraries that are provided in C#. So we're going to go ahead and create a list of games, and we're going to call it game list, and then equals new list. All right, so there we go. We've created a new list of games, and it's completely empty. So here, what we're going to do is in the constructor, we're going to go ahead and add in, essentially just three items to this game list. So we're going to do game list.add, and then new games. So we're going to add in a new game, and we're going to pass in a string called World of Warcraft, and we're going to give it a price of 50. So then we'll go ahead and we'll just copy and paste this to make it really fast. So what we're doing here is we're just creating 3 objects, adding them to our games list, which we'll then use to populate our table. So we'll call this Overwatch, and we'll make that worth 60 because it's better than World of Warcraft. And then we'll take this and we'll call it StarCraft for whoever plays that game. All right, perfect. So now we've got this, we've got our 3 objects ready to go. So we've got this list, got 3 game objects. Now we need to dive in and start overriding table view functions that'll actually allow us to manipulate a table and create it. So we've created that, we've got our constructor going. So the first function that we're going to override is the function that lets the program know how many rows are going to be on our section. So what we're going to do is public override, and then you'll see it auto-populate. And then for this, it's really simple. Since we know we're going to be pulling from this list, we'll just have it get the game list dot count, and that'll return how many elements are in the list. So every time we reload the table view, it'll just check the game list, see how many elements are there, and then plan on generating that many cells. Then the other thing we're going to do is override, override get height for row. All right, so what this does is it sets the height for row. There are a lot of cool things you can do to set the height dynamically. Since we set the height of our designer cell, of our XIB cell to 80, we're just going to go ahead and have it return 80 and not worry about that for now. Again, I just want to make this quick and get you up and running with the table view, and then you can go around and play with all this. But yeah, now time for the big show. This is what actually is going to start generating those cells. It's your get cell function. So we're going to override the get cell function. So here we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new cell that is going to look at our table view and try and dequeue a reusable cell. So what that does is game cell. Here, let me finish typing this out and then I'll explain it a little bit. So they have this nifty feature called dequeue reusable cell. So what that tries to do is see if there's already a cell in memory that's not being used, and so it tries to dequeue a cell that can just be reused instead of creating a brand new one. But it doesn't always have one in memory that it can just free up. A lot of times you're creating this table view from scratch, so there won't be anything there, so it'll return null, but it's a good practice to do, just so that way if you're using a table view that has thousands of cells in it, it can reuse cells that are already in memory instead of creating them from scratch and just obliterating the system memory. So what we're going to want to do is check and see if this cell is null. And then if it is, what we're going to want to do is do cell equals new game cell. Perfect. So there we go. We've got a new cell. And there's a little bit more that we need to do. Oh, yeah, I forgot. There's another thing we need to add here to make sure this is running. We're going to want to using system, or sorry, we're going to be wanting to use foundation and using Objective-C runtime. And I'm not going to dive in too deep on what's going on here. You can do some more research on your own if you'd like to. But these next few lines of code, basically what it's doing is it's just allowing you to reuse your cell and pull your cell from an XIB file instead of creating it from scratch programmatically. So you're just going to do nsbundle.mainBundle.load_nib. So loading the nib is like loading the XIB file. So for the nib name, we're just going to use the key that I mentioned earlier, gamecell.key. The owner is going to be the cell, obviously, that we just created. And then the dictionary options we just set to null because we don't really need to worry about those right now. And then finally, to get the nib into the cell, we do cell equals runtime dot get ns object views dot value at 0 as game cell. So it's going to take that nib that we just loaded into our views object and then cast that to a game cell and assign it back to our cell. And there we finally have a cell ready to go. So we can go ahead and type in return cell. And that is everything we need to take our nib file and load it into our table view. But there's one last thing we need to do. And that would be to actually put unique information in this cell. So what we're going to do is go cell dot populate cell, that function that we created earlier, and pass in our list items. So how we do this is actually a really cool feature that's built in. So we've got our game list, and then we're going to do it by index. And then if you notice right here, there's this thing called index path, and it's really neat because it starts out at 0 and then starts counting the cell that you're on. So your cells should line up perfectly with whatever list you're loading from, assuming that you're getting the number of rows in the section from your list. So if we do that, it allows us to go to games list and then use the index path dot row. So that gets the current row, and the rows start at 0, just like our list index does, which is really convenient. So it allows us to do this, and then whatever order our list is in, that's whatever order our cells will be in. So yeah, we're good to go. The last thing we need to do is just hook up this button from the main storyboard. So here we go. We can just double click on it, and it'll take us into our view controller. And perfect. So here we go. When that button is pressed, all we want to do is navigation controller dot push view controller, and then we'll create a new my table controller. Perfect. And then we want that to be animated because it looks nice. So that's all you do. You create the new controller, and basically what this does is it pushes it on the stack for of the navigation controller, so that way you'll have a nifty back button to get back to your home screen. And that's kind of just the way I like to do it. So assuming we did everything right, we should be able to hit play. And give it a second, because running on simulators always takes forever unless you've got a really nice Mac, but unless you've got $10,000 laying around, probably not the case. So now I just give it a second, connecting to the debugger. Alright, perfect. So we have our show table button. We click on that, and then you can see here our beautiful cells all ready to go. So I'm going to create some more videos after this that'll show you how to start building off this, and how to handle row selections, how to add in a search bar programmatically that'll let you search through this super fast. And the search bars are great and super responsive. But for now, I'm going to post all this code below. Sorry, this video is a little bit longer than I expected it to be. First time. So sorry about that. But yeah, hopefully I'll be able to speed up some parts of it and make it a lot cleaner. But hopefully this is helpful. I'm doing a lot with Xamarin right now, especially in iOS, and if there's anything that you want to learn how to do, just go ahead, post a comment below. The videos will get shorter and conciser and a lot cleaner. But yeah, just let me know what you think. Let me know what you'd like to do differently, and hopefully this helps you out and saves you a lot of headache that I had to go through to get the information to actually make this video. But yeah, have a good one.